It is impossible to fight the universe's decisions after it has made its choice. While doing some computer tests, a mysterious individual receives an encrypted file. After decoded the message, an AI contacts him in real time and informs him that it is aware of the man's employment being terminated. On the PC, a file named Transfiguration Project emerges, but the AI intends to finish the job that the enigmatic man started. The guy hesitates and asks why, to which the AI responds that it is the only thing strong enough to halt the impending disaster. The end of the world astronomer Michael Swafford is interviewed on television regarding his new book, In the End, There Was Light, while the scene shifts. Michael covered gamma-ray bursts, or GRBs, in his book. Astrophysicists predict that a gamma-ray burst, GRB, will be the reason why humanity will disappear from the Earth. Michael explains that a dying star releases too strong, narrow beams of radiation, which is how a GRB is created. He then verifies the existence of AWR 104, a fading star in the Milky Way galaxy. Regretfully, Earth is situated exactly along the beam zone's route. Stated differently, it appears as though a gun barrel is pointed directly at you. The DNA of several people is then analyzed on a computer screen until a perfect match for a test participant is found. Following that, a man going by the name of Joseph Stedman, or Joe, sees a taped video of his daughter Zoe and pregnant wife Heather on TV. Joe offers naming their unborn child Rhea, which means ray of light, to Heather as they discuss potential names for the child. In the video, it appears like the Stedman family is content. As opposed to Joe's current awful situation, Joe doesn't realize that a secret camera placed in his lampshade is watching him. The person selected for the Transfiguration Project is Joe. The mystery man from earlier turns out to be a crazy scientist, and it turns out that he is being watched everywhere at all times. It becomes clear from observation that Joe is receiving treatment for depression, suicidal thoughts, and problems controlling his rage. The insane scientist is also keeping an eye on Joe's daughters. Then it is discovered that Joe abandoned his family following Heather's death. Because of this, Zoe harbors resentment toward her father. Nevertheless, despite the absence of her father's assistance, Zoe grows into a strong, self-reliant lady. In addition, she dates Michael Swafford. Meanwhile, Rhea develops a drug addiction similar to that of her father. The two sisters lead rather different lifestyles. Michael and Zoe flirt at a library. Michael puts down the stack of books they had gathered as he leans in to kiss her. When Zoe gets up, she informs Michael about the fate page, a book that falls open to a page that can be interpreted as a fortune cookie and applied to one's life, like the fortune-telling game she and Rhea used to play before Zoe forces Michael to attempt a medical book's fate page. The sentence essentially highlights the idea of one person giving their life to rescue others despite its solely medical nature. Resuming our conversation with Joe, he informs us that he has been offered a position in a facility that is supported by the government. Strangely, despite never having applied, the institution managed to find his identity and recruit him. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Joe takes the job. A year later, he received an award for abstaining from all drugs. Joe recalls the time he had it all. With a devoted wife, 2 lovely girls, a dog, and a house he can call his own, Joe then visits Zoe and makes an effort to patch things up with her. Joe makes every effort to convince her that he has changed and that he can assist Rhea with Zoe, but Zoe isn't ready yet. Michael blocks Joe, and Zoe, pissed from receiving his present, despite Joe's insistence on doing so. Joe attacked Michael out of the blue and grabbed his throat. Even Joe is shocked by what he's just done when Zoe stops him. Later on that evening, Zoe attempts to call Rhea, but she doesn't pick up. Zoe believes her sister is back on drugs. Michael comforts her and tells Zoe that he will always be there for her. Joe tries to call Rhea as well, but he gets a voicemail instead. Joe is urged to reassure Heather that he would support their girls in a flashback. Joe apologizes to Heather for breaking his word. After a year of abstinence, he picks up drinking once more. Regretfully, he is unaware that there is someone hidden in the back seat. Suddenly, the stranger kidnaps Joe by covering his head with plastic. At last, the insane scientist introduces himself as Mike. The injection of something into Joe's eye is then seen. Weakened and confused by the voice in his brain, Joe awakens on the streets. Then he discovers a small suitcase with a revolver inside. Joe lets out a painful scream as Mike presses a key on his keyboard. Mike says that a gadget was put through Joe's optic nerve. It lets them see what Joe sees, and it also lets Joe see what they want him to see. Joe witnesses Mike forcing Rhea to purchase the drug. Additionally, Mike tells Joe that he has been observing his family for a long time. He goes on to show Joe that Zoe smokes, telling him that his actions have caused his family to fall apart. He is trying to get Joe to follow him by manipulating Joe's conscience. When Sabi, a lady, arrives, she asks Joe what's going on. Although Joe advises her to contact the police, Mike blackmails Joe. Joe is given the order to kill the woman or else Rhea will perish. With nothing more to do, Joe takes up the firearm and squeezes the trigger, but nothing occurs. Mike assures Joe that he will now be his higher authority, but as Joe turns to face Sabi, who turns out to be Mike's accomplice, she tases him. In the meantime, evidence suggests that a dying star is really spewing gamma-ray bursts into space. Sabi tells Mike that all the arrangements have been made. Conversely, when Joe awakens, he discovers that he is confined to a small area. When he tries to dial 911, the operator threatens to murder his daughters if he ever gets in touch with the police again. Joe is finally allowed to leave his car's trunk when he accepts Mike's demands. Observing Joe via a drone, Joe is told to go somewhere by Mike. The scene switches to Zoe seeing a phone video of herself and Rhea. She makes another attempt to call her sister, but is unsuccessful. Returning to Mike, he gives him the order to go into Charles Margre's home. Mike tells Joe to scare Charles into unlocking his safe when he gets to Charles's room. Although Joe is still reluctant to comply with Mike's orders, Mike only needs to show Joe a gun aimed at his daughter's head for him to force him to do so. After arriving at the safe, Joe gives Charles the go-ahead for the laptop. Joe is then instructed to place his finger on the laptop's fingerprint reader. Joe's DNA data is displayed and the label is written. Charles is in shock at what he just saw, and Sequence Compatible validates that he is the person they are searching for. Joe then attaches a metallic LED gadget to the laptop. Sabi can now duplicate every file on Charles's laptop thanks to this. Once they have everything they need, Mike tells Joe to remove Charles, but Joe is reluctant to comply. Distracted, Joe pushes Charles down without realizing he's already armed, and Charles swiftly takes up the revolver. Joe informs Charles who he is and what the boss is ordering him to do. Charles, however, finds it hard to accept that his worker is the match. After that, Charles examines Joe's eye and discovers the optic implant. Chuck adds they shut down the transformation project because it's too risky. Realizing that Mike can see and hear him, Chuck gives Joe the command to proceed, not realizing that Chuck would be killed by the drone. At last, Joe is told to amputate Charles's thumb. Joe then visits Redlock, the corporation he works for. Simultaneously, the drone under Sabi's control unleashes tiny drones that find their way to the building's ventilation system. When Joe puts on a mask, the drones release chemicals that everyone in the building inhales and kills them. Joe begs Mike to stop, but he instead demonstrates to Joe that the identical drone is in his daughter's room, ready to go off in 4 minutes if he doesn't make it to the main facility. Joe bolts for the main facility as soon as he can, grabbing a key card from security. When he finds out that security is still alive, he shoots his revolver. Although Joe avoids the gunfire, it messes up Mike's audio feed since it's too close to his ear. Joe was able to get to the main facility on time thanks to the audio stream being repaired. He then provides Mike and Sabi with access to the core by using Charles's thumb. Joe inquires as to his daughter's well-being. But in order to protect his daughter's life, Mike gives him one more command. Joe is told to enter the machine to activate the throw switch, but this is only a trap. The door shuts and the machine starts on as soon as Joe enters. Joe queries Mike's motivation for doing this. Mike merely informs him that he is the ideal subject since it is in his DNA. Mike continues by saying that there's no use in opposing the cosmos when it determines what it wants. Thus, the Transfiguration Project gets underway. Joe's DNA begins to change. The process then results in a large explosion inside the structure. As Mike is unwinding to violin music, the explosion's aftermath is horrifying. When the AI asks Mike if it worked, the crazy scientist responds, "Yes, Joe is alive and ready for testing right now." Michael is tending to Zoe in the meantime, who is inconsolable right now after seeing the news of the explosion on Redlock. Zoe feels sorry for not giving his father a chance when he was still living. She also regrets never giving up on him. However, Joe is still alive and awakens at his house, wrapped in a large foil bag. What does Mike do to Joe? He queries. Rather than responding to his inquiry, Mike talks about scientific topics that Joe is ignorant of. Joe tries to contact his daughter, but the phone is unreachable. Angry Joe produces a blast of energy that modifies the nearby electrical equipment. Joe's hand begins to release lights. In a fit of rage, he hits a wall and effortlessly ruins his bathroom wall. Mike describes how he turns Joe's vulnerability into his strength, and Mike is astounded by what he is witnessing. Joe's boundless strength now stems from his rage, fear, worry, and general turmoil inside his body. Mike continues by saying that Joe may utilize his newly acquired abilities to help his family. He then assigns Joe a new task. With nothing else to do, Joe just obeys Mike's instructions. When he gets outside, he discovers that his automobile is gone. Then it becomes clear that Joe has electromagnetic power. Joe only has to release a little energy to start a motorcycle. Joe's anger increases as he grows stronger. As he plays with his pendulum, Mike continues to explain that everything is merely a matter of cause and effect. Mike tells him to face Nico Sola in order to test him. The guy who exploited Rhea and was the cause of her addiction. Zoe, meanwhile, notices the present Joe previously placed in her luggage. She opens it and finds the rock she gave him when he was little, demonstrating Joe's unwavering affection for her. When the picture returns to Joe arriving at what appears to be a warehouse, he wanders about and approaches a man, asking if he is Nico. The man runs away after pointing his camera at Joe and flashing his eyes, refusing to respond. Joe follows, but because he is unfamiliar with the area, Nico gets the upper hand and captures him. After tying Joe up, Nico asks for his name. Nico strikes Joe and displays a VHS bearing the name Rhea after knowing that Joe is Rhea's father and hearing his last name. Joe recalls the day his precious, innocent Rhea baked a cake for him. In the video, Rhea is drugged up and totally insane as Nico is abusing her. Joe can't contain his anger and lets out a lot of electromagnetic energy. However, Mike's computer indicates that further stress levels are needed because the massive energy failed. Returning to Joe, I see that the explosion has caused the area to burn. Nico stabs Joe, but the dagger merely gets absorbed by his body. Joe is shot by another man, but the bullets barely pass through him. Then, in a fit of retaliation, Joe takes a knife to attack the man who shot him. However, when the knife passes through the man's neck, it becomes energy. Joe comes up to Nico in the meanwhile, but Nico gets into his car. Joe pauses to assist a woman leaving the warehouse, and as a result, Nico is about to strike Joe. However, Mike stops him and shows him Rhea's video again, which makes Joe fume. As a result, Joe is able to emit more electromagnetic energy, but this time it is focused and directed toward Nico. When Joe inquires as to what is wrong, Mike just responds, "I failed again." Furthermore, he informs Joe that the police are approaching and gives him instructions to turn himself in so that he may examine himself more deeply. However, Joe tries to flee rather than follow Mike, and, regrettably, the police still trap and capture him. After a while, Joe is questioned by the investigators about his knowledge of the Red Lock event and other recent explosions. Despite Joe's sincerity, they do not trust him. Believing Joe to be a terrorist, they inquire as to who he works for. The investigators believe Joe is even more insane after Mike gives him the command to claim he is working for a higher authority. Then he is told to declare that the port is bombed. The police go for the port right away, but Mike assures Joe that everyone would survive if he reaches the device first, but that 20,000 people will perish if the cops reach it first. Tense Joe bursts once more, but he doesn't change. Then he leaves right away for the dock. A hint that the explosive is inside a shipping container is given to Joe by Mike. Zoe, in the meantime, is watching his father's intense chase on television. She finds it hard to believe Joe is still alive and that he is being held responsible for the recent explosions. Joe's body glows in the car until he eventually transforms into pure energy and speeds throughout the city. The live footage of Joe's car explosions is shown on the news. Mike sits back in his chair and observes Joe until his computer indicates that Joe's change has finally stabilized. Next, his guys storm into Zoe's home. As the armed guys take them, Michael is unable to stop them. As the police arrive at the harbor, they start looking for the explosives right away. Joe also shows up at the dock in his full massive energy form. He swiftly causes all of the cargo containers to ascend into the air. The detonation occurs in midair. However, the impact scatters additional cargo boxes, forcing one of them to collide with an aircraft. The aircraft collides with a railroad. Thankfully, Joe uses his electromagnetic energy to save the train and the aircraft. He keeps the train from going off the tracks and stops the plane from collapsing any farther. Joe then visits Zoe's home, where he discovers just a laptop. Mike makes fun of Joe's timidity, and he shows Joe that he has Michael and Zoe. Joe uses the laptop screen to follow Mike and Zoe's whereabouts, and he enters Mike's hiding place right away. When Joe gets to the man's lair who caused him this misery, he surrounds Zoe and Michael with a shield and destroys the entire location. When the security personnel first see Joe's shape, they look on in fear. They attempt to remove him, but Joe dispatches them with ease as he carries on, causing chaos across the area. When Joe speaks with his daughter, he appears to be someone else. He tells Zoe that everything is well and that they're heading to collect Rhea. Michael, in the meantime, is staring at Joe with amazement as though he has seen a deity. It is subsequently discovered via a few flashbacks that the AI Mike is initially speaking with is actually a video feed of Michael. Mike is the one who encourages Mike to go forward with the Transfiguration project. Mike gives Michael the order to shoot Zoe, angry as the scene shifts to outer space where the gamma ray explosion is already headed for Earth. Joe scolds Michael. He caters to his daughter, right away reassuring Zoe that they will return home. Unfortunately, after pleading with her father for forgiveness, Zoe dies. Joe holds on to her deceased daughter and apologizes repeatedly. When was the last time he gave Heather a hug? At last, Mike gets up from his chair to observe Joe lamenting the loss of Zoe and Rhea together. To make matters worse, Joe witnesses through a monitor as Mike's men storm into Rhea's apartment. They place a gun in her hand and blow her head off, giving the impression that she has committed suicide. For Joe, losing Rhea and Zoe is the final straw. Now that everyone he loves is gone, he becomes absolutely insane. Joe explodes with a ton of electromagnetic energy. It's so massive that he turns into Earth's shield. Achieving omnipotence, Joe became a deity in his own right, and in his final words, Mike begs Joe to deliver us. Joe shielded Earth from a dying star's gamma ray blast when it was in space. Joe becomes the guardian of mankind, even if he is unable to keep his girls safe. However, this doesn't stop Joe from keeping his word to Heather. Joe uses his omnipotence to bring Rhea and Zoe back to life. On the beach where their family used to vacation, Zoe and Rhea woke up. When Joe whispers 143 to Zoe as his energy hugs Earth, the film concludes with Zoe saying the same. What are your thoughts on this film, guys? Tell me in the comments section below. Furthermore, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe and like them. See you soon in the next video. Take care and bye now.